So we're going to start by talking about the process of aging, so some of the things that are going on biologically that trigger aging. In general, you tend to sort of grow and strengthen throughout early childhood and adolescence. Around 20, most people sort of peak in terms of physical abilities and cognitive abilities, and then you start this aging process and things kind of start to plateau and then eventually decline. So we'll talk about those biological processes. Then we'll talk about some sexuality and sexual behaviors, which become more prominent during this early adulthood time. And then we'll move on to talking about cognitive development. So we'll talk about changes in thought and cognition, and then also college and vocation, as those are some of the prominent things that are happening during early childhood. For most people, did I say early childhood? I meant early adulthood, sorry. For most people, early adulthood involves a number of really drastic, large changes. So you're going to be graduating from high school and typically leaving home. Most people are going to start college or go straight into some sort of career. It's going to be the first time in your life that you're beginning full-time work. You may have had a job in high school or something, but it's unlikely you would have been a full-time employee until early adulthood. It's during this period most people will attain economic independence, so they're no longer depending on their parents, but instead are funding themselves. Most people during this period will establish long-term intimate relationships with a spouse, and also maybe continue some of those relationships with friends. And most people during this time also will have children and start a family. The timing of these milestones varies pretty drastically and have been changing over the course of decades. So we'll see an example, for example, we'll see how the age of first child has changed quite a bit over the past few decades. And so it's not like these milestones are reached at a particular time or anything like that. And of course, there are lots of people who will not, hit in some of these certain milestones. Some people won't have a family, some people won't go to college, etc. But these are just kind of the typical things. The overall average life expectancy has increased around 25 to 30 years during the 20th century. So people are living longer, living healthier lives for the most part. That's mostly due to changes in diet and nutrition, advances in medical treatments, also things like sanitation, etc. There's just all kinds of advancements we've made that have overall increased the average life expectancy. All right, so like I said, for the most part, throughout childhood and adolescence, you're growing, becoming stronger, your cognitive abilities are increasing and getting better. In your early 20s is where most people tend to typically peak, and then after that, things kind of stabilize and eventually start to kind of go downhill. And that downhill process, or those declines, are due to biological aging that occurs both at the DNA and cellular level and also at the more tissue organ level. There are specific biological things that happen in the DNA and in the cells that trigger the aging process. And aging is definitely something that's still not fully understood. It's not like we know all of the factors that contribute to genes and cells aging, but there are a few theories as to what causes it. The two main classes of theories, one of them talks about programmed events that happen in the cell through the DNA. Other theories talk about just random events that happen from the environment, exposing your cells to particular types of damage. So for the programming or the programmed effects of specific genes, there's some evidence that there may be specific genes that are involved in the aging process, either genes that trigger aging or more likely genes that actually protect you and increase longevity. Some pieces of evidence in favor of that are the fact that the average life expectancy is similar within families. So if you have parents and grandparents who lived to a really healthy, ripe age, then it's somewhat likely that you will as well, due to genetic factors. Another cellular DNA thing that's going on is telomere shortening. I'm going to talk about that more on the next slide, so I'll skip over that one for now. Those are the programmed effects of specific genes. In addition to that, though, there are random events that subject our cells and our bodies to different types of damage. As you're growing, your cells are dividing, and every time they divide, there's a chance that the DNA may have some sort of mutation, that it's not copied correctly, and just over time, through those random processes, you're more likely to sort of accumulate multiple mutations. And that can result in damage to the cells, and in some cases can result in cancerous cells or abnormal tissues, which can lead to the aging process. In addition to that, we're all exposed to what are called free radicals. These are basically just reactive chemicals that are created in the presence of oxygen, essentially. And these free radicals kind of bounce around inside your body and your cells, and they can do damage to the DNA and to the cells themselves. And just over time, as you're exposed to more and more of these free radicals, then that damage accumulates. So free radicals are believed to be a major contributor to aging if you're exposed to them at really toxic levels. There's some evidence that some of the genes, the aging genes, actually are genes that protect or do not protect against free radicals. So if you have a gene that's protecting you against free radicals, then you're going to have a longer lifespan compared to someone who doesn't have those genes or has mutations in those genes. All right, so I mentioned on the last slide that one of the programmed sort of cellular or DNA mechanisms of aging is the shortening of something called telomeres. Telomeres are basically the DNA at the end of each chromosome. And you can think of them as kind of like protective caps on the DNA. So every time your cell replicates, that DNA is being replicated as well. And with each replication, there's sort of a trimming of the ends of the DNA. So every time a cell reproduces, some of these end pieces are getting cut off. And so those telomeres are there so that every time it replicates, you're cutting off this telomere, which is not like the functional part of the DNA. Those telomeres don't code for any proteins or anything that's contributing function. And so, initially as your cells are reproducing, it's just cutting off those telomeres and everything works fine. After a number of reproductions, though, those telomeres are basically gone. There's no more telomere to snip away. And oftentimes that will basically result in that cell no longer being able to replicate or reproduce. And so then that cell will die and it will not be replaced. And so as that happens over the course of a lifetime, you're having more and more cells dying off and being damaged. It's been shown that life circumstances can either hasten that shortening or decrease the shortening. So things like chronic illnesses, unhealthy behaviors like smoking, excessive drinking, drug use, etc. All of those actually speed up this telomere shortening process, which may be one of the reasons that all of those factors contribute to shorter lifestyles or shorter lifetimes. And healthy behaviors, things like exercise, eating a healthy diet, actually protect those telomeres and keep them longer for a longer period of time. Telomerase it prevents and even reverses the shortening of the telomeres. And like I said, positive lifestyle changes prompt increases in telomerase, which, like I said, can be protective and increase someone's lifespan, basically. So you have all these biological mechanisms going on at the cellular level, at the level of the DNA, and those build up over time and then contribute to damage and dysfunction at the tissue and organ level. And again, there's sort of different theories about what's happening at that level that contributes to the symptoms that you get from aging. One of these theories is called the cross-linkage theory. Basically says that over time, there's certain proteins and things that build up in the organs and the tissue that bond in ways that they normally don't whenever you're younger, and that bonding creates all kinds of issues. So for example, it basically makes the tissue less elastic. That contributes to issues with elasticity in both your skin and your muscles, so you become less flexible. It makes it harder for your skin to spring back so that you develop wrinkles, things like that. It also contributes to cloudiness in the eyes, which can lead to difficulties in seeing, visual problems, etc. And in addition to that, it can lead to things like clogging arteries, kidney damage, etc. So this cross-linkage contributes to a lot of the damage and dysfunction that you have at that organ and tissue level. In addition to that cross-linkage, you have gradual failure of the endocrine system, which is basically the system that regulates the hormones in the body. And hormones, play a huge number of roles in your health and in your physiology. And so if you have dysfunction in the endocrine system, then that can cause all kinds of issues. Probably one of the most understood examples of that is the fact that as women age, their body produces less and less estrogen, and eventually that leads to menopause, which we'll talk about in more detail when we get into kind of middle adulthood. But so that's another thing that's contributing. In addition, you have deterioration overall in immune system functioning, so that increases your susceptibility to disease and pathogens and things like cancer. Probably all of these things contribute together, so all the cellular mechanisms I talked about and cross-linkage, all of these things work together to give you the overall effects that you have from biological aging.